Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open.
About 35 years ago, a girlfriend and I were driving home through a small town in Oklahoma when we saw something that neither of us could explain. It was late, probably around midnight or even later. At that hour, the roads around town were usually empty. Most people were already home, the businesses were closed, and there were very few lights apart from porch lamps, street lights, and the occasional glow from a distant house. Small towns can feel completely different after midnight. During the day, everything is familiar. You recognize the roads, the fields, the houses, and the people passing by. At night, the same places seem larger and more isolated. The open land becomes completely black, and you can drive for long stretches without seeing another car. I had driven those roads many times before, so I was not worried about being out late. My friend and I were talking as we traveled home, probably discussing ordinary things that I no longer remember. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Then I noticed a light in the sky. I do not know why it caught my attention. Maybe it appeared brighter than everything around it, or perhaps its position seemed strange. Whatever the reason, I kept looking at it while I drove. At first, I thought it was a star. It was only a single point of light, and from a distance, it did not have a clear shape. I could not see wings, flashing signals, or anything that immediately identified it as an aircraft. But the longer I watched, the less it looked like a star. It appeared much brighter. It also seemed closer to the ground. Stars feel distant and fixed. Even when they look bright, there is still a sense that they are far above everything around you. This light did not seem that far away. It looked as though it were somewhere over the road or nearby fields. I pointed it out to my friend. I remember telling her that it looked like it was following us. At the time, I may have said it partly as a joke. When you drive at night, distant objects can seem to move with you. The moon is the most obvious example. A star, radio tower, or faraway light can remain visible from the same angle for several miles, creating the illusion that it is traveling beside the car. That was probably what I expected was happening. Still, I kept watching it. Every time the road curved or we changed direction slightly, the light seemed to remain with us. It did not disappear behind trees or buildings the way I expected. It stayed in view, bright and steady. My friend looked at it too. I do not remember exactly what she said, but I know she noticed it. The light was not something only I could see. That became important later. If I had been alone, I might have eventually convinced myself that I misunderstood what happened. I might have blamed tiredness, poor visibility, or my own imagination. But another person was in the car, watching the same light. We continued driving. The roads became quieter as we moved away from the center of town. There were fewer houses, and the darkness around us became deeper. The headlights illuminated only a narrow area of road in front of the car. The light remained above us or somewhere ahead. I tried to judge its distance, but that was impossible. At night, a small, bright object nearby can look similar to a large object much farther away. It might have been a plane traveling in our general direction. It could have been a helicopter with a powerful searchlight. Those were reasonable explanations, although I do not remember hearing the sound of an engine or rotors. There was only the steady noise of our own car and the conversation between us. As we got closer to home, I turned onto the road where we lived. It was a familiar turn. I knew the road well and had no reason to expect anything unusual. The moment I completed the turn, everything changed. The light was suddenly directly in front of us. 1 second, it had been in the sky. The next, it was low over the road, close enough that it seemed to block our path. I did not see it move gradually downward. It did not drift toward us like a helicopter. It appeared to zip from its position above us to a point directly ahead at an incredible speed. The movement was almost instant. That is the detail I have never been able to explain. The light did not approach from a distance. It seemed to cross the space between the sky and the road faster than my eyes could properly follow. Suddenly, it was there. It was bright enough to dominate everything in front of us. I could no longer think of it as a star or distant aircraft. It felt close. I do not remember seeing a solid object around the light. There may have been one, hidden by the brightness or darkness, but I could not make out any metal body, wings, windows, or other structure. All I could see was the light. My friend and I began screaming. The change had happened too quickly for either of us to stay calm. We had been watching something that seemed distant, and then it appeared directly in our path without warning. I reacted without thinking. I began honking the horn repeatedly. I do not know what I expected the horn to do. Maybe it was an instinctive reaction, the same way someone might honk at an animal or another vehicle blocking the road. Perhaps I hoped that if a person was controlling whatever was ahead of us, they would move. I threw the car into reverse. My only thought was to get away. I did not carefully check behind us or consider whether another vehicle might be approaching. The road had been empty, and fear took control before I could think logically. The car moved backward while both of us continued screaming. I kept looking through the windshield at the light. Then it disappeared from the road. Almost immediately, it was back in the sky. Again, I did not see it rise normally. It did not slowly climb, becoming smaller as it gained altitude. One moment, it was close to the ground in front of us. The next, it was high above us again. The movement happened in what felt like the blink of an eye. There was no smooth path between the two positions. It was as though the light had been switched off on the road and switched on again in the sky. For a moment, I sat there in shock. Then I stopped reversing, put the car back into drive, and raced toward home. I did not care about speed limits. I did not want to stop anywhere along the road. I only wanted to reach a house filled with other people and get away from whatever we had seen. I kept glancing in the mirrors and looking through the windshield. The light was still visible above us, but I do not remember whether it continued following the car after that. My attention was focused almost completely on reaching home. My friend was frightened too. We talked over each other, trying to understand what had happened. Neither of us had a good explanation. We had both seen the light in the sky. We had both watched it appear directly in front of the car. We had both seen it return to the sky almost instantly. There was no disagreement between us about the main event. When we reached the house, we went inside and immediately told everyone what had happened. We were still excited and frightened, probably speaking too quickly and interrupting one another. We explained that a bright light had followed us and then moved down in front of the car before shooting back into the sky. No one believed us. That reaction was not entirely surprising. The story sounded impossible. We had no photograph, video, or physical evidence. This happened long before people carried smartphones capable of recording almost everything. Even if we had owned a camera, there would not have been time to use it. The event happened too quickly, and both of us were more concerned with getting away than collecting proof. To the people in the house, we were two frightened young women arriving late at night with a strange story. Maybe they thought we had seen an airplane. Maybe they believed we were exaggerating. Someone may have suggested we were tired or that our imagination had taken over. I do not remember every response. I only remember the disappointment of realizing that no one truly accepted what we were telling them. It is difficult to describe something impossible when the listener has already decided it did not happen. You start questioning your own words. You wonder whether you are explaining the distance correctly, whether the movement was really as fast as you remember, or whether fear made the light seem closer. But my friend had been there. That kept me from dismissing the experience completely. We had not discussed UFOs or strange lights before it happened. We had not been searching the sky for something unusual. The light appeared during an ordinary drive home. Both of us reacted at the same moment. Both of us screamed. I reversed the car because we believed something was blocking the road. That was not a misunderstanding created years later. The fear was immediate. For the next several days, I replayed the event in my mind. I tried to create ordinary explanations. Perhaps it had been a helicopter. A helicopter can hover, carry a strong light, and move vertically. If it had been flying toward us with a spotlight, maybe the changing angle created the illusion that it suddenly appeared in front of the car. But a helicopter at that distance should have made a great deal of noise. At night in a quiet rural area, the sound would have been impossible to miss. I do not remember hearing rotors. A helicopter also could not move from the road back into the sky as quickly as that light seemed to move. Perhaps it had been an airplane. A plane coming toward you at night can look like a stationary light because the angle does not change much. If it turns, the light can suddenly appear to move. But an airplane would not drop to road level, stop directly in front of us, and then return upward in an instant. There were no visible wing lights. We did not hear an engine passing overhead. The airplane explanation never felt right. Another possibility was that two separate events happened at the same time. Maybe the light in the sky was an aircraft, while the bright flash in front of us came from something on the ground. A transformer could have exploded. Electrical equipment sometimes produces a powerful flash that lights up the surrounding area. If a transformer blew near the road at the exact moment we turned, perhaps we connected that flash to the light above us. I have told myself that many times. It is one of the most reasonable explanations I have found. But a transformer explosion should have produced more than a silent light. There should have been a loud bang, sparks, smoke, damaged power lines, or an electrical outage. I do not remember any of those things. The light did not seem to come from a utility pole beside the road. It appeared in front of us, then returned to the sky. Maybe a car approached from another direction with bright headlights. A rise or curve in the road can make headlights appear suddenly. The driver could have turned away just as quickly, creating the impression that the light vanished. But we were familiar with that road. The light did not look like two headlights. There was no vehicle body, engine noise, or sound of tires. It also did not drive away along the ground. We saw it above us again. For years, I continued searching for explanations. Every possibility worked for one part of the event, but failed to explain another. A plane explained the light in the sky, but not its sudden movement. A helicopter explained its ability to hover, but not its speed or silence. A transformer explained a bright flash near the road, but not the same light reappearing overhead. A car explained something blocking the road, but not the movement into the sky. I began to wonder whether distance and darkness had confused us. Perhaps the light never moved as far as we thought. When we turned onto the road, the change in our position could have made the same distant light appear directly ahead. Then, as I reversed and changed the angle again, it may have seemed to return upward. That kind of visual effect is possible. But the light felt close enough that I believed we were in danger of hitting something. Both of us reacted as if a physical object had entered the road. I honked the horn. I reversed quickly. We were not calmly observing a distant star-changing position because of a turn. We believed something was directly in front of the car. The memory affected me long after that night. I became nervous when driving alone after midnight. Open roads that had once felt peaceful began to feel exposed. I would look into the sky more often, searching for lights that seemed too bright, too low, or too steady. If I noticed one, I watched it carefully until it disappeared or revealed itself as a plane. I still do that now. Most lights have simple explanations. I see airplanes turning toward an airport. I see helicopters, towers, stars, planets, and satellites. Sometimes a distant aircraft appears to remain still until it changes direction, and I understand how easily someone could mistake it for something unusual. But I have never seen another light behave the way that one did. Nothing else has dropped from the sky and appeared directly in front of my car. Nothing else has returned upward so quickly that I could barely follow it. The experience also changed the way I respond to other people's stories. When someone says they saw something strange in the sky, I do not automatically assume they are lying. They may be mistaken. They may have misunderstood an aircraft, a balloon, a drone, or a natural light. But they may also have seen something they genuinely cannot explain. I know how frustrating it is to tell the truth and watch people dismiss it because the event does not fit their understanding of the world. My friend and I did not gain anything from the story. No one paid us. We did not become famous. Most people did not even believe us. Eventually, we stopped bringing it up. I have not talked about it openly for many years. There is always a risk that someone will laugh or immediately search for a way to prove the experience could not have happened. I understand skepticism. Extraordinary claims require strong evidence, and we had none. But a lack of evidence does not mean an experience never happened. Sometimes, something appears without warning and disappears before anyone can document it. All that remains is the memory of the witnesses. It has been around 35 years, and I still remember that drive. I remember the darkness around the road. I remember noticing the bright light above us. I remember saying that it seemed to be following the car. I remember turning onto the road home. Then I remember the light suddenly appearing directly in front of us. The fear from that moment has never completely left me. I can still hear my friends screaming. I can remember hitting the horn and putting the car into reverse. I can remember looking forward and seeing nothing but that bright light. Then it was back in the sky. It happened too quickly for us to understand. Sometimes I wonder whether the light had been watching us. That is not something I can prove, and I usually avoid thinking about it. Still, the way it appeared after we turned onto our road felt deliberate. It had remained at a distance while we drove through town. Then, when we entered the quieter road leading home, it came down. Maybe that was only a coincidence. Maybe the turn changed our perspective and created the entire illusion. But it did not feel accidental. It felt as though something had followed us until we were away from other people and then moved directly into our path. I am grateful that it did not remain there. I do not know what I would have done if it had moved closer or followed the car all the way to the house. I do not know whether there was an object behind the light or whether it was only some kind of strange energy or reflection. I saw no creatures, windows, or clear spacecraft. Calling it a UFO does not necessarily mean I believe it was an alien vehicle. It only means it was an object or light in the sky that I could not identify. After 35 years, it is still unidentified to me. I continue giving myself normal explanations because they make the memory easier to live with. A helicopter, an airplane, a transformer, two unrelated lights seen at the same moment, a trick caused by the road, darkness, and our own fear. Any of those would be better than believing something unknown deliberately came down in front of us. But deep down, I do not believe those explanations. I know how quickly the light moved. I know how close it seemed. I know my friend saw it too. And I know that when I threw the car into reverse, the light left the road and returned to the sky in less time than it takes to blink. That is why I still become nervous when I drive alone late at night. Even after all these years, I watch the sky. Whenever I see a strange light, I wait for it to reveal itself as something ordinary. Most of the time, it does. But part of me is always waiting to see that same light again, following silently above the road until I make the wrong turn. When I was a child, my family lived in an old house that had been passed down through my father's side of the family. It was a large house, much bigger than most of the newer homes around it, and it had been built sometime before the Second World War. The house had been standing for decades before I was born. Different relatives had lived there, moved away, returned, and raised families inside it. By the time I came along, the building already carried years of memories, old stories, and small details no one fully understood anymore. During the day, it looked like an ordinary family home. It was old, but it was not falling apart. The rooms were wide, the ceilings were high, and the wooden floors made small noises whenever someone walked across them. The house had the usual problems old buildings have. Doors did not always close smoothly. The walls sometimes made soft cracking sounds when the weather changed. Pipes rattled, and footsteps could travel farther than expected. Most of those things were easy to explain. There was only one part of the house that never felt normal to me. The second floor had 3 bedrooms. The third bedroom was located toward the back of the house and had a huge window facing the backyard. That window was one of the first things people noticed when they entered the room. It took up a large part of the wall and allowed a clear view of the garden below. The backyard was overgrown with plants and thick vegetation. There were bushes, vines, and areas where the grass grew faster than anyone could control it. Even during the day, some parts of the yard stayed dark beneath the leaves. In the middle of all that vegetation stood one enormous tree. It was much larger than every other tree around it. Its trunk was thick, and its branches spread over a wide section of the yard. Some of them reached toward the house, while others stretched high above the roof. From the third bedroom, the tree was always visible through the window. You could close the curtains, but you still knew it was there. As a child, I was uncomfortable with that bedroom for reasons I could not explain. Nothing terrible had happened to me inside it. I had never walked in and seen a ghost standing beside the bed. I had never heard a voice calling my name from the window. The room simply felt wrong. Every time I approached the doorway, the hairs on my arms and neck would rise. I would become aware of the silence inside, even when the rest of the house was full of noise. I did not like standing there alone. If I had to enter the room to get something, I did it quickly. I would keep the door open, avoid looking at the window for too long, and leave as soon as possible. It felt as if someone was watching me. The feeling did not always come from one clear direction. Sometimes it seemed to come from the dark corners of the room. Other times, it felt connected to the window and the tree beyond it. I was young, so I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Children are easily frightened by empty rooms, shadows, and old houses. The room may have felt strange only because it was quieter or less frequently used than the others, but I was not the only person who reacted to it. My family sometimes had helpers who stayed in the house. Their sleeping area was in the bedroom beside the third room. More than one of them said they did not like sleeping near it. They described a feeling similar to mine. They said something seemed to come from that room, almost like a pressure or presence that spread through the wall. They did not always claim to see anything. Most of the time, they only said the room felt occupied. At night, that feeling became stronger. They would lie in bed and sense that something was awake in the next room, even though no one was sleeping there. The door might be closed, but they still felt watched. It was difficult to dismiss all of them as nervous children because they were adults. Some of them had not heard the family stories before staying in the house. They formed their opinions after spending time near the room. One of my aunts also had a disturbing experience there. She slept in the third bedroom while visiting the family. At some point during the night, she heard footsteps outside the door. The steps moved slowly across the hallway. That alone could have been explained. Old houses carry sounds strangely. Someone walking in another part of the building might sound closer than they actually were, but the footsteps were followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged along the floor. My aunt said it moved directly outside the room. She could hear the footsteps, then the scraping sound, as if someone were pulling a heavy object across the hallway. The noise would move, stop, and then continue. She listened from inside the room, waiting for whoever was outside to pass. No one opened the door. She did not hear anyone speak. When she checked later, there was nothing in the hallway that could have made the dragging sound. No furniture had been moved. No one in the house admitted being awake. Perhaps the sound came from somewhere else. Maybe a pipe shifted inside the wall or a branch scraped across part of the house. But to my aunt, it had sounded like footsteps and something being pulled directly outside her door. Another incident involved one of my father's friends. He stayed in the same room one night. He had no reason to be frightened of it. He was an adult, and as far as I know, he did not arrive expecting anything unusual to happen. During the night, he woke because the bed was shaking. It was not a small vibration caused by a truck passing outside or someone walking heavily in another room. He said the bed itself moved as if someone had grabbed it. The shaking continued long enough to wake him completely. When he looked around, no one was there. There was nothing beneath the bed. The room was still, and the huge window showed only the dark backyard and the shape of the tree. He told the family about it afterward. By then, the room already had a reputation. Every new story made that reputation stronger. Some relatives believed something supernatural lived there. Others said everyone was influencing one another. Once people hear that a room is haunted, they begin paying attention to every noise. A normal creak becomes a footstep. A mattress shifting becomes a bed being shaken. Fear can turn small things into frightening experiences. That explanation made sense, but it did not explain why so many people felt uncomfortable before hearing all the stories. At some point, a psychic visited the house. I do not remember exactly why she came or who invited her, but she spoke with my grandmother about the third bedroom. She said there were presences inside it. According to her, there was more than one. She did not describe them as constantly violent or aggressive. She said they usually preferred to watch. That detail disturbed me. Being told that something wanted to attack would have been frightening, but at least it would have been clear. The idea of unseen beings standing quietly inside the room and observing people felt worse. It matched the feeling I had always experienced there. The room never felt like a place where something was waiting to jump out. It felt like a place where something was already present, silent and aware. The psychic's words divided the family. Some believed her immediately. Others thought she was only repeating information she had already been given or making vague statements that could apply to any old house. I do not know whether she truly sensed anything, but she pointed to the same room that had made people uncomfortable for years. The tree in the backyard became part of the story later. While my mother was pregnant, she became very sick. At some point, a witch doctor was brought to the house. Practices like that may sound strange to some people, but in many families and cultures, it is not unusual to call someone who claims to understand spiritual problems when ordinary explanations do not seem enough. The witch doctor looked around the property. Then he pointed toward the giant tree. He said something was connected to it. According to him, whatever occupied the tree had also become connected to the third bedroom, because the room was so close to it. The large window faced the tree directly. From inside the room, the branches seemed almost close enough to touch the house. The witch doctor believed the distance between them had created some kind of path or attachment. I do not know exactly what he meant. Maybe he believed a spirit lived in the tree and moved between it and the bedroom. Maybe the tree acted as a place where different presences gathered. Whatever his explanation was, he connected the two places my family already found disturbing. After that, people began paying even more attention to the tree. It had always looked old and impressive, but now it felt different. During the day, it was simply a massive tree surrounded by vegetation. At night, it looked almost like part of the house. The branches cast shadows against the upper windows. When the wind moved them, the shapes crossed the walls and glass like long arms. From inside the third bedroom, the trees seemed to fill most of the outside view. It was difficult to look past it. One of my cousins later described an experience connected to the same tree. She had been playing in the backyard near it. Nothing unusual happened while she was outside, at least nothing she noticed at the time. She played around the trunk and beneath the branches like a normal child. That night, she had a nightmare. In the dream, a father-like figure came out of the tree. It was not necessarily her own father, but it had the shape or feeling of an adult male figure. The figure chased her away. She remembered it as something emerging directly from the trunk or the area around it. Dreams can be strange, especially after children play in places that already make them nervous. Maybe she had heard people discussing the tree before falling asleep. Perhaps her mind used those stories to create the nightmare. But the dream added another layer to the family's fears. The tree was no longer only connected to the third room by the witch doctor's claim. A child had dreamed that something human-like lived inside it. Over the years, the stories continued to collect. Someone would mention feeling watched. Another person would say they heard movement near the room. Visitors avoided sleeping there if another bedroom was available. Family members disagreed about how much of it was true. Some people believed every story. Others believed none of them. I remained somewhere between those two sides. I knew what the room felt like to me. That feeling had begun when I was young, before I fully understood the stories surrounding it. Every time I entered, my body reacted. The air seemed heavier. The silence felt too complete. Even on warm days, the room sometimes felt cold. I never saw a clear figure standing there, but I often felt that if I turned quickly enough, I might catch someone watching from the edge of the room. The window was the worst part. In daylight, it showed the green backyard and the huge tree. At night, it became a dark sheet of glass. Sometimes the inside of the room reflected on it, making it difficult to tell whether a shape was behind you or outside among the branches. I did not like standing with my back to it. Whenever I entered the bedroom alone, I was aware of the tree beyond the window. I imagined something standing near the trunk and looking up. I imagined a face hidden among the branches. I imagined something moving from the tree toward the house without touching the ground. Those thoughts may have been created by the stories. But the fear felt physical. My skin would tighten, and the hairs on my arms would rise before I even looked outside. There were times when I wondered whether the room itself was responsible for the stories. It had the perfect design for frightening people. It was on the second floor, separated from the busiest parts of the house. The huge window opened toward a dark, overgrown yard. The old tree created constant moving shadows. The wooden hallway made noises at night. A person sleeping there might hear branches scraping and believe something was being dragged. Wind or loose parts of the bed could cause shaking. The feeling of being watched might come from the large window and the knowledge that anyone in the backyard could see into the room. Those are reasonable explanations, but each explanation covers only one part of the history. It does not explain why different people describe the same sense of presence. It does not explain why helpers disliked the room without being told to fear it. It does not explain the psychic and witch doctor both identifying the same area. It does not explain why the tree became connected to so many experiences. Coincidences can collect when people live in the same house for generations. In a large family, dozens of people may sleep in one room over many years. Some will have bad dreams. Some will hear old floors creak. Some will wake during storms or feel the bed move. Eventually, those events become a story. Then, new visitors enter already expecting something to happen. I understand how that process works. Still, I doubt every part of it was coincidence. The house had existed long before any of us. We did not know everything that had happened there. We did not know who had lived on the land before it was built, what may have been buried beneath the yard, or why the tree had grown so large. Old family houses often hold secrets simply because no one remembers the beginning. Perhaps nothing supernatural ever lived in that room. Maybe the real source was the tree. Some cultures believe old trees can carry spirits or energy. A tree that survives for generations witnesses births, deaths, arguments, celebrations, and changes in the land around it. It remains while people come and go. I do not know whether trees can hold anything beyond physical life, but that tree always felt more present than an ordinary part of the backyard. It was too large to ignore. Its roots must have spread beneath much of the property. Its branches reached toward the house like they were trying to touch it. If something was connected to the land, the tree seemed like the most likely place for it to remain. The third bedroom stood closest to it. Maybe that was why the room felt different. Perhaps the window acted like an open door, even when the glass was shut. Sometimes I think about my father's friend waking while the bed shook. I imagine him opening his eyes and seeing the dark window. Beyond it, the tree would have filled the view. If the branches were moving, their shadows might have crossed the room. Maybe wind caused everything. Or maybe something had come inside. I also think about my aunt listening to footsteps and dragging sounds outside the door. If the presences in the room preferred to watch, as the psychic claimed, perhaps the noise outside was not something trying to enter. Maybe it was something leaving. That possibility never occurred to me when I was young. We always assumed the danger waited inside the room. But what if the room was only where it returned? The helpers slept next door and felt something coming from it. My aunt heard movement beyond the doorway. My father's friend felt the bed shake while lying inside. The experiences seemed to move around the room rather than remain in one place. The tree created another possible direction. Whatever people sensed may have moved between the yard, the window, and the hallway. I never tried to stay in that bedroom alone at night. Maybe if I had, I would have learned there was nothing to fear. I might have heard the normal sounds of the house and finally understood how the stories began. Or I might have experienced something that confirmed all of them. Part of me regrets not finding out. A larger part of me is relieved. Some questions are easier to carry than answers. The house remained in the family for a long time, and the stories stayed with it. People who knew about the third room treated it differently. Even those who claimed not to believe in ghosts usually avoided spending unnecessary time there. They might laugh during the day, but at night they closed the door quickly. No one wanted the bed closest to the window. No one wanted to look outside at the tree after the lights were off. That reaction told me more than their words. People can say they do not believe something. Their bodies often tell the truth first. Even now, years later, I still feel uneasy when I remember the room. I can picture the large window and the dark branches beyond it. I can remember standing at the doorway and feeling my skin tighten for no clear reason. I remember knowing that the room was empty, while also feeling certain that I was not alone. I do not know whether the psychic was correct about multiple presences. I do not know whether the witch doctor truly sensed something in the tree. I do not know whether my cousin's nightmare meant anything. Any one of those stories could be dismissed. The footsteps could have been the old house settling. The dragging noise could have been a branch. The shaking bed could have been a dream or a weak frame. The feelings could have come from suggestion. The nightmare could have been only a nightmare. But when all those experiences point toward the same room and the same tree, it becomes harder for me to call every one of them a coincidence. Maybe nothing evil lived there. Most of the stories involved watching rather than attacking. The presences, if they existed, rarely harmed anyone. Perhaps they were connected to the family or the land and simply remained where they had always been. That idea is almost comforting. Almost. Because no matter how harmless something may seem, being watched by something you cannot see is still frightening. The third bedroom never felt empty. The tree never felt like only a tree. And even now, when I imagine that huge window facing the overgrown backyard, I feel the same warning I felt as a child. Do not stay too long. Do not turn your back to the glass. And whatever you do, do not look too carefully at the tree. I was about 8 years old when I saw something in the sky that I still cannot explain. I am not an adult even now, but this happened years before commercial drones became common. At the time, people were not regularly flying small drones over neighborhoods, parks, or houses. Most people I knew had never even seen one in real life. That is important, because whenever I tell someone what I saw, a drone is usually the first explanation they suggest. Maybe that is what it was. But the object I saw did not move like any normal drone I have seen since then. It was also moving extremely fast, and the pattern of lights was unlike anything I knew existed at the time. I was outside at night when it happened. I do not remember the exact date, or even what month it was. I also do not remember why I happened to be looking at the sky at that moment. I may have been standing in the yard, walking near the house, or simply looking outside because something caught my attention. What I do remember is the object itself. It was already dark, so I could not clearly see its body. There was no visible metal surface, no clear wings, and no shape I could easily describe. The darkness hid almost everything except the lights. Those lights were arranged in 2 circles. The inner circle had 3 lights. Each one appeared to be a different color, although I cannot remember every exact color now. The three lights were rotating clockwise. Around them was a larger outer circle of lights. Those lights were also different colors, but they were rotating in the opposite direction. While the inner circle spun clockwise, the outer circle moved counterclockwise. The two circles turned at the same time. That was what made the object so strange. It did not look like a normal airplane with lights on the wings and tail. It did not look like a helicopter. It was not simply one blinking light moving across the sky. The lights were moving around one another in a clear pattern. Even as a child, I understood that I was looking at something unusual. I watched it move through the darkness. It was fast. I do not mean it was moving at the normal speed of a plane flying high above the ground. It seemed to cross the sky much more quickly than I expected. I had only a short time to study it before it moved away. Because it was dark, I could not tell how large it was or how far away it was. That makes it difficult to estimate its true speed. A small object nearby can appear to move faster than a large object far away. I understand that now. But at the time, it looked as if the object was traveling at a speed far beyond anything I had seen moving over our area. I do not remember hearing an engine. There may have been some sound in the background, but no loud aircraft noise stands out in my memory. I do not remember the heavy chopping of helicopter blades or the roar of a low-flying plane. What stayed with me was the image of the lights. Three lights in the middle turning one way, a larger ring around them turning the other way. Then the entire object moving quickly through the night. It disappeared before I could understand what I was seeing. I may have tried to follow it with my eyes, but it was gone too quickly. There was no explosion, no flash, and no sound that marked its disappearance. It simply moved beyond where I could see it. At 8 years old, I did not have the knowledge to identify aircraft. I knew what planes looked like. I knew what helicopters looked like. I had probably seen blinking towers, stars, satellites, and distant vehicles. This looked different from all of them. I remember feeling confused more than frightened. The object did not come toward me. It did not stop above the house. It did not shine a beam onto the ground or do anything threatening. It only passed through the sky. But the way the lights rotated made me feel that I had seen something I was not supposed to understand. I told people about it, although I do not remember everyone I spoke to. Most likely, the adults around me assumed I had seen a plane, a helicopter, or some kind of toy. That would be the reasonable response to an 8-year-old describing colored spinning lights in the sky. Children misunderstand things all the time. They also have active imaginations. I know that. But I was not trying to invent a story. I was describing what I genuinely believed I had seen. Years later, when drones became popular, I started seeing videos of them flying at night. Some drones had colored lights. Some could move quickly. Some could turn, hover, or change direction in ways that normal planes could not. For a while, I wondered whether I had simply seen an early drone. That would explain the lights and perhaps the unusual movement. But the timing still bothered me. This happened before commercial drones were common. Nobody in my area seemed to own one, and I had never seen anything like it before or after that night. The lights also did not seem attached to 4 arms like the lights on many common drones. They formed 2 complete rotating patterns. The inside and outside appeared to be spinning independently in opposite directions. Maybe the object itself was not spinning. It is possible that the lights were blinking in sequence, creating the illusion of rotation. A ring of lights turning on and off one after another can look as if it is moving even when the object remains stable. That would be a normal technical explanation. But it still raises the question of what kind of object was using such a pattern in the sky at that time. It could have been a specialized aircraft. It could have been a remote-controlled model. It could even have been an optical illusion caused by distance, darkness, and my age. I cannot prove otherwise. I only know that I remember the structure clearly. There was an inner group of 3 lights. There was an outer circle. The 2 rotated in opposite directions. Then the object moved away at high speed. The experience became even more interesting to me because my father had his own story. His sighting happened long before mine. He was a senior in high school at the time, sometime in the early 1970s. He lived in a quiet neighborhood, and one night he was walking home in the middle of the road. That may sound dangerous now, but he said the area was very quiet. There was little traffic, especially at night, so walking in the road was not unusual. As he walked, he noticed something above him. He said it was a UFO. According to him, the object was hovering about 50 feet above the ground. That is extremely low. 50 feet is close enough that an ordinary aircraft would appear enormous. A plane could not simply remain still at that height. A helicopter could hover, but it would create a great deal of noise and wind. My dad did not describe it as a helicopter. He said it remained above the ground without moving. For a couple of seconds, he stared at it. Then, it sped away. He described the movement as sudden and extremely fast. It did not slowly gain speed like a plane taking off. It simply left. When I first heard his story, part of me wondered whether he was joking. UFO stories are easy to exaggerate. People sometimes add details each time they tell them. A strange light becomes a disk. A distant plane becomes an object hovering directly above the road. That is one reason I have questioned him about it so many times. I have asked him to tell me the story again and again. I wanted to know whether the details would change. They never did. He always said he was in high school. He was walking home. He saw an object hovering around 50 feet above the ground. He watched it briefly. Then it shot away. The order of events remained the same. The height remained the same. The location remained the same. Even the small details of the story stayed consistent. I have asked him when he was completely sober. I have also asked him when he had been drinking. I know that may sound like a strange way to test someone, but I wanted to see whether he would accidentally change the story when he was less careful. He did not. Even while drunk, he told the same version. That does not prove the object was extraterrestrial. A person can honestly misunderstand something and repeat the misunderstanding consistently for years. But it makes me believe that my father is not intentionally lying. I believe he saw something. The question is what it was. Because the sighting happened in the early 1970s, there were fewer ordinary explanations available than there would be today. There were no consumer drones flying above neighborhoods. Aircraft technology existed, of course, including experimental military vehicles, helicopters, planes, balloons, and other machines. But most of those would have produced noise or moved in recognizable ways. An object hovering silently 50 feet above a residential road and then accelerating away would have been difficult to explain. The time period also interests me because UFO reports were receiving a lot of public attention around those years. There had already been major waves of sightings in earlier decades. Newspapers, television programs, and ordinary people were talking about flying saucers, strange lights, and unexplained objects in the sky. That could work in 2 directions. Maybe unusual objects really were being seen more often. Or maybe people had UFOs in their minds and were more likely to interpret normal aircraft as something mysterious. My dad was young at the time. Perhaps he saw a helicopter in unusual lighting. Maybe it was farther away than he believed. Maybe fear or surprise changed the way he remembered its height and speed. Again, those are possible explanations. But when he tells the story, He does not sound excited or dramatic. He describes it plainly. That is part of what makes it believable to me. He does not claim aliens stepped out of the object. He does not say it followed him home. He does not add messages, missing time, or secret government agents. He only says he saw something hovering above the road and then watched it fly away faster than anything he expected. My own experience was different. I did not see an object hovering close to the ground. I saw rotating circles of colored lights traveling through the darkness. Still, the two stories feel connected because they happen to members of the same family. I sometimes wonder whether there is a reason both of us had unusual sightings. Maybe there is no connection at all. People look at the sky every day. Millions of aircraft, satellites, weather balloons, meteors, and lights move above us. It is not impossible for two related people to misidentify something at different points in their lives. But the fact that my father had told me his story made me take my own sighting more seriously. If I had been the only one, I might have eventually convinced myself that I imagined it. Knowing he had seen something strange years before made me wonder whether we had both witnessed the same type of phenomenon. I have tried to compare the objects. My father did not describe rotating lights like the ones I saw. I did not see the solid shape or low hovering movement he described. That means there is no clear evidence they were the same kind of object. The only real similarities were that both moved in ways we could not explain, and both disappeared quickly. I sometimes wish I had been older when I saw mine. An adult might have noticed more details. I could have looked for the exact shape, estimated its direction, listened carefully for sound, or tried to record it. At 8 years old, I simply watched. I did not have a phone ready to film the sky. Even if I had access to a camera, the object moved so fast that I probably would not have captured anything. That is the problem with experiences like this. They happen without warning. By the time you understand that something unusual is happening, it is already over. Then all you have is memory. Memory is not perfect. I know my mind may have changed parts of the event over time. The colors may not have been as bright as I remember. The rings may not have been perfectly circular. The speed may have seemed greater because I was young. But the main image has never changed. Two sets of lights, one rotating clockwise, the other rotating counterclockwise. The entire pattern moving quickly across the night sky. I have searched my memory for something ordinary that could match it. An airplane could have multiple colored lights, but they would not normally rotate around the body in opposite directions. A helicopter might have a spinning rotor, but the lights would not look like two circular rings. A drone could create complex light patterns, but this was before they became common, and it seemed too fast. A spinning toy might have looked similar, but it would probably have been much closer to the ground and would not have crossed the sky the way this did. A firework would have faded or exploded. A meteor would have moved in a straight line and would not have contained organized rotating lights. A satellite would have appeared as one steady point. None of those explanations fully matches what I remember. That does not mean it came from another planet. UFO simply means unidentified flying object. It describes something seen in the sky that the witness cannot identify. By that definition, I saw a UFO. I do not know who made it. I do not know whether it was advanced human technology, a rare aircraft, a strange visual effect, or something not from Earth. I only know I could not identify it then, and I still cannot identify it now. The idea of aliens is both exciting and frightening. The universe is so large that it seems possible life exists somewhere else. Whether any of that life has visited Earth is a completely different question. Stories alone cannot prove it. Photographs can be fake. Videos can be misunderstood. Witnesses can make mistakes. My father and I could both be wrong about what we saw. I accept that. But being mistaken is not the same as lying. My father believes his experience happened exactly as he describes it. I believe I saw those rotating lights. Neither of us gained anything from telling the stories. We were not looking for attention, money, or fame. They were simply strange moments that stayed with us. Sometimes I ask my father about his sighting again, even though I already know what he will say. Part of me is still testing him. Another part simply wants to hear the story because it reminds me that I am not the only person in the family who has looked into the sky and seen something that did not make sense. His answer is always the same. He was walking home. The neighborhood was quiet. The object hovered around 50 feet above the ground. He watched it for a few seconds. Then it sped away. And whenever I think about his story, I remember my own sighting. I remember being 8 years old in the darkness. I remember looking up and seeing colored lights arranged in 2 circles. I remember the inner lights turning clockwise while the outer lights turned the opposite way. Then I remember how quickly the whole thing moved away. Maybe one day I will see a video of an old aircraft or an unusual drone and finally recognize it. Maybe there is a simple explanation that I have not found yet. I would honestly prefer that. A normal answer would allow me to place the memory into a clear part of the world. Until then, it remains unexplained. My father saw something hovering above a road in the early 1970s. Decades later, I saw something with rotating colored lights moving through the night sky. Neither of us knows what those objects were. But after hearing his story remain exactly the same year after year, and after carrying my own memory for so long, I believe both of us saw something real. What that something was is the part that still troubles me.
We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal.
My sister and I shared a bedroom on the first floor of our house when we were younger. We also shared a set of bunk beds. She slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom. The room was not especially large, but it was familiar. I knew the position of every piece of furniture, the shape of the walls, and the way shadows normally fell across the floor at night. I had slept there for years, so even in darkness, I usually knew exactly what I was looking at. Our bedroom door opened into a hallway. We normally left it open at night, and there was a night light plugged into the wall outside. It was brighter than most night lights. The glow reached through the doorway and illuminated the entire door, part of the wall, and a good section of our bedroom. The room was never completely dark. That detail is important because I did not see something hidden in total darkness. The hallway light was bright enough for me to clearly see the outline and movement of what appeared on the door. One night, I suddenly woke up. There was no loud sound. No one called my name. Nothing fell or moved inside the room. My eyes simply opened, and I became completely awake. For a few seconds, I remained still on the bottom bunk, wondering what had disturbed me. I listened carefully, but heard nothing unusual. My sister was still asleep above me. I could hear her snoring softly, so I knew she had not moved or spoken. Her breathing was steady and normal. The house around us seemed quiet. There were no footsteps in the hallway and no voices coming from another room. I did not hear my parents moving around. As far as I could tell, everyone else was asleep. I looked toward the open bedroom door. The nightlight in the hallway was still on, casting a bright rectangle of light across the door and the nearby wall. At first, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed movement. A shadow began passing across the bedroom door. It looked as if something was entering the hallway from another part of the house and slowly making its way toward our room. I stared at it, trying to understand what could be creating the shape. The shadow was small. It appeared to be only 3 or 4 feet tall, much shorter than an adult. It did not have the normal proportions of a child, though. Its body was bent forward. Its back looked hunched, and its head seemed to hang low in front of its shoulders. The arms curved strangely at its sides, almost as if the joints were bent in the wrong direction. At the ends of the arms were long fingers. They looked more like claws than human hands. The entire body appeared extremely thin. Its arms and legs looked narrow and weak, and the outline of its torso seemed almost skeletal. The only way I can describe it is that it looked dehydrated, as if its skin had been pulled tightly over its bones. Even though I could see only the shadow, the shape contained a disturbing amount of detail. I could see the curve of the back. I could see the long fingers. I could see the narrow body and the way it seemed to lean forward as though it were stalking something. It did not resemble anyone in my family. It did not look like my mother or father walking through the hallway. It did not look like an ordinary child. It looked like a creature. The shadow moved slowly across the door. From the direction it was traveling, it seemed as though the thing casting it was walking down the hallway toward our bedroom. That thought terrified me. I could see only the shadow. The actual creature should have been somewhere outside the room, just beyond the doorway, and out of my direct line of sight. I lay completely still. My entire body became stiff with fear. I did not pull the blankets up. I did not turn away. I did not call for my parents or wake my sister. I was too afraid to make any sound. The only thought in my mind was that if I stayed still, it might not realize I was awake. I watched the shadow reach the bedroom door. Then it stopped. It remained there, cast across the illuminated surface. I could not see the actual creature in the hallway, but the shadow clearly showed that something was standing close to our room. It seemed to be waiting just outside. I tried to control my breathing. Every breath felt too loud. My heart was beating so hard that I was certain whatever stood in the hallway would hear it. The shadow did not move closer. It did not enter the room. It simply remained on the door. I stared at the long fingers and curved arms. There was no better word for the shape than demon. I know that sounds dramatic. I'd seen drawings and images of monsters before, but this did not look like a character from a movie or a cartoon. It looked more disturbing because of how thin and unnatural it was. There was nothing exaggerated or theatrical about it. The shape seemed weak and powerful at the same time. Its body looked starved, but the arms and claws made it seem dangerous. It stood in a position that suggested it could move quickly if it wanted to. I remember wondering whether it was looking into the room. The shadow had no clear eyes or face, but I had the strong feeling that the creature knew we were there. Maybe it was watching my sister and me sleep. Maybe it was waiting for one of us to move. I did not dare look up at the top bunk. I wanted to check whether my sister was safe, but turning my head or speaking might have attracted attention. Her snoring continued above me. She had no idea anything was standing outside the room. Part of me wanted to wake her. If she opened her eyes and saw the shadow too, then at least I would not be alone. But another part of me was afraid she would scream. If the creature had not noticed us yet, a scream might cause it to enter. So I stayed silent. The shadow remained on the door for what felt like the entire night. In reality, it may have been around 30 minutes. I cannot be completely certain. I did not have a clock where I could easily see it, and fear changes the way time feels. A few minutes can seem like hours when you are waiting for something terrible to happen. Still, it was not a quick glimpse. The shape did not pass the doorway and disappear within seconds. I stared at it long enough to memorize the details. I watched the position of its back. I studied the bent arms. I saw the long, thin fingers resting near the lower part of the shadow. At times, I wondered whether it was actually moving. The outline seemed to shift slightly, as if the creature were breathing or adjusting its weight. Then it would become still again. I tried to find an ordinary explanation. Maybe a coat or bag was hanging in the hallway. Perhaps the nightlight was creating a strange shadow from an object near the door, but I knew what the hallway normally looked like. There was nothing outside our room shaped like that. A hanging coat would not slowly approach from another part of the hallway. It would not stop at the doorway and change its position. Maybe one of my parents had walked past something and created the shadow, but the shape remained after the person should have moved away. I had not heard any footsteps. The floor outside our room was not completely silent. If someone had walked down the hallway, I should have heard them. There was no sound at all. The house seemed to be holding its breath with me. At one point, I considered closing my eyes. I thought that if I stopped looking at the shadow, maybe it would disappear. But I was afraid that if I closed them, the creature would enter the room. I needed to know where it was. I needed to see if the shadow moved closer. So I kept staring. My eyes began to hurt, but I barely blinked. I remember feeling trapped between two terrible choices. I could stay completely still and hope the creature left, or I could call for help and risk making it notice me. I chose to remain still. After what felt like around 30 minutes, the shadow finally began to change. The hunched shape shifted. The arms seemed to move slightly, and the outline became less clear. I thought it was about to enter the room. My entire body tensed. I expected to see a hand curl around the edge of the doorway or a dark head appear from the hall. Instead, the shadow simply disappeared. It did not move quickly away from the door. I did not watch it walk back down the hallway. The outline shifted, faded, and then was gone. The door remained brightly illuminated by the nightlight. The hallway beyond it looked empty. I continued staring. I did not trust the empty doorway. The creature might have stepped into a part of the hallway where its shadow was no longer visible. It could have been standing just outside the room, waiting for me to relax. I listened for movement. Nothing happened. My sister continued sleeping above me. I stayed frozen for several more minutes before I finally moved. I slowly pulled the blankets over my head. The covers offered no real protection, but hiding beneath them made me feel slightly safer. I curled up and tried to make myself as small as possible. I did not sleep again that night. Every time the house creaked, I imagined the creature entering the bedroom. I expected claws to touch the blanket or a face to appear beside the bed. I kept listening for footsteps, breathing, or scratching. There was nothing. Eventually, morning came. The light outside slowly brightened the room, and normal sounds returned to the house. My sister woke up without knowing anything had happened. She had slept through the entire experience. I got out of bed and checked the hallway. There was nothing unusual there. No marks on the floor, no scratches on the door, no object that could have created the shadow. Everything looked normal. That almost made the experience worse. In daylight, the hallway seemed harmless. It was difficult to understand how such a terrifying shape could have appeared there only a few hours earlier. I told my mother what I had seen. I explained that I had woken up and watched a small, hunched creature moving toward our room. I described the thin body, curved arms, and long claw-like fingers. She dismissed it as a bad dream. That was the obvious answer. I had woken during the night, seen something frightening, and become too scared to fall asleep again. From an adult's perspective, it sounded like a nightmare that continued for a few moments after I woke. Maybe that was exactly what it was. Children sometimes experience vivid dreams, sleep paralysis, or hallucinations while waking. The brain can remain partly asleep even after the eyes open, causing dream images to appear inside a real room. I understand that now. At the time, however, being told it was a dream did not help. I knew I had been awake. I had heard my sister snoring. I had watched the shadow for what felt like half an hour. I had thought through different explanations while looking at it. It did not feel like a dream. It felt as if something had entered the hallway and stood outside our bedroom. After that night, I became more nervous about sleeping on the bottom bunk. I often looked toward the doorway before closing my eyes. If the hallway light created any unusual shape, I watched it until I understood what it was. Sometimes I asked for the bedroom door to be closed. Other times, closing it frightened me because I worried something might be standing on the other side. The creature did not return, at least not in the same form. For years, I carried the memory alone. The experience still affected me, but there was no proof that anything paranormal had happened. My mother believed it was a dream, and my sister had slept through it. I began questioning myself. Maybe I had been dreaming with my eyes open. Maybe the shadow lasted only a few seconds, and my memory stretched the event over time. Perhaps an ordinary object had created the shape, and fear caused me to see claws and a hunched body where there were only random shadows. Those explanations were possible. I tried to accept them. As I grew older, however, I began having more strange experiences. They started again during my late teenage years. I will not go into every incident now, but they were significant enough that my family could no longer dismiss everything as dreams or imagination. Other people began noticing strange events. Things happened while I was awake, and in some cases, when family members were nearby. My parents eventually believed me. That was a major change. For years, the creature in the hallway had been treated as nothing more than a childhood nightmare. Later experiences made my family wonder whether something else had been happening in the house. They decided to have the home cleansed and blessed. The exact process involved prayers and attempts to remove any negative presence from the property. I do not know whether such things truly work. Some people believe strongly in spiritual cleansing. Others believe the effect is psychological and that the ceremony simply helps frighten people feel safe again. Whatever the reason, the experience has stopped. I have not had anything similar happen to me in around 5 years. There have been no more figures, shadows, or unexplained presences. I have not woken up feeling watched. Nothing has stood outside my bedroom. That should allow me to forget what happened. It has not. The image of the shadow remains clear. Even now, describing it gives me goosebumps. I remember its size, 3 or 4 feet tall, small enough that someone might first mistake it for a child, but shaped in a way no child should ever be shaped. I remember the bent back and the way its head seemed to lean forward. I remember the curved arms and the long fingers. Most of all, I remember the feeling that it was slowly moving toward us. It was not simply a random shadow appearing on the wall. It seemed to have intention. It entered the hallway. It approached our room. Then it stopped outside the doorway. Sometimes I wonder why it never came inside. Maybe it could not cross the doorway. Maybe it noticed I was awake and decided not to enter, or perhaps it had already entered. And what I saw on the door was only its shadow while it stood somewhere inside the bedroom. That last thought is one I try not to consider. The position of the shadow suggested something was in the hallway, but light and angles can be misleading. If the creature had been inside the room, it might have been standing near the foot of our bunk beds while I watched its outline on the door. Maybe that was why I never saw the actual body. It may have been closer than I thought. I also wonder whether the shadow was connected to the experiences I had as a teenager. Perhaps something had been in the house for years. Maybe I noticed it first when I was young because children are more sensitive to strange things. Or maybe the later incidents caused me to reinterpret an ordinary childhood nightmare as something paranormal. I try to remain open to both possibilities. A hallucination is a reasonable explanation. I had suddenly awakened, and my brain may not have fully left the dream state. The condition could explain why I felt paralyzed with fear and why the shadow looked so detailed. Sleep-related hallucinations can feel completely real. People sometimes see figures, animals, faces, or creatures standing in their bedrooms. Some remain visible for several minutes. That might be what happened, but I was not unable to move because my body was physically paralyzed. I chose not to move because I was afraid. At least that is how I remember it. I felt that if I moved, the creature would know I was awake. My body was capable of movement, but fear kept me still. I eventually pulled the covers over my head after the shadow disappeared. That difference has always made me question the sleep paralysis explanation. The length of the experience also bothers me. A quick waking hallucination might vanish after a few seconds. The shadow remained long enough for me to study it and think through what I should do. Again, fear may have distorted time. I cannot prove that 30 minutes actually passed. Maybe it lasted for only 1 or 2 minutes, but it was still more than a moment. I also cannot ignore what happened later in my teenage years. If the hallway shadow had been the only strange event in my life, I might completely accept that it was a nightmare. But when other experiences became serious enough for my family to cleanse and bless the house, the childhood memory began to feel different. It seemed less isolated. Maybe it had been the first sign. The fact that nothing has happened since the blessing gives me some comfort. At the same time, it makes me wonder what exactly stopped. If everything was caused by stress, dreams, or imagination, why did the experiences end after the house was cleansed? Perhaps the ceremony helped me feel safe, and that reduced the chances of sleep-related hallucinations. That is possible. Or perhaps something really was removed from the house. I will probably never know. I still do not tell the story often. It sounds too strange. A small, dehydrated-looking demon with claws casting a shadow across a bedroom door sounds like something from a horror movie. People naturally search for an ordinary explanation. I do the same thing. I would rather believe my young mind created the figure. That answer is less frightening than believing a real creature came down the hallway and stood outside the room while my sister slept above me. But when I remember that night, it does not feel imagined. I can still see the bright hallway light. I can still hear my sister snoring. I can still see the shadow slowly crossing the door. And I remember lying completely still, terrified that if I made even the smallest movement, the thing outside our room would realize I was awake. When I was about 12 years old, I had a couple of friends over for a sleepover during the summer. We had planned the entire night like it was going to be some big adventure. Instead of sleeping inside the house, we wanted to stay outside in the small clubhouse built on top of our jungle gym. The clubhouse was not anything fancy. It was just an enclosed wooden space high enough off the ground to make us feel independent. At 12, sleeping outside without adults nearby felt exciting, even though we were still only a few steps away from the house. We carried blankets, pillows, snacks, and whatever else we thought we would need. We climbed into the clubhouse and tried to settle down, but it quickly became uncomfortable. The space was too small for all of us. It was summer, and the air inside became hot and heavy. There was very little ventilation, so within a short time, it felt like we were breathing the same warm air over and over. None of us wanted to admit the plan had failed, but eventually we all agreed that staying in there for the whole night would be miserable. We climbed down and looked for somewhere else to sleep. There was a trampoline in the backyard, and we decided it would be perfect. It was wide enough for all of us. It was out in the open where the air was cooler, and we could lie on our backs and look at the sky. We carried our blankets over and made ourselves comfortable. The backyard was normal for a suburban property. There were neighboring houses nearby, and at the back of the yard was a line of trees separating us from the next property. It was not a forest. The trees were probably only 20 or 30 feet deep, just enough to create a dark barrier between the yards. During the day, you could walk through them without much trouble. At night, however, they looked much thicker. Once the sun went down, the spaces between the trunks became completely black. There were no streetlights shining through from behind them, and from the trampoline, it was difficult to see where our yard ended and the next one began. At first, none of that bothered us. We lay on the trampoline talking about whatever 12-year-olds talk about during sleepovers. We told jokes, shared secrets, talked about school, and probably tried to frighten one another with stories. I do not remember the exact conversations anymore. What I remember is that we stayed awake for a very long time. We had no intention of sleeping early. The whole point of the sleepover was to stay up as late as possible. We were the kind of kids who treated falling asleep first as some kind of failure. Every time one person became quiet, the others would tease them or ask whether they were already asleep. At some point, it became very late. I do not know the exact time. It could have been after midnight or several hours later. The house had been dark for a long time, and the neighborhood was completely quiet. The air had cooled, but it was still comfortable. We were talking when something appeared near the trees. At first, I noticed only one small light. It was floating close to the ground, somewhere near the back of the yard. Then, another appeared, and another. Before long, several small white lights were drifting out from between the trees. My first thought was that they were fireflies. Fireflies were common enough in summer, and seeing small lights moving around the yard would not have been strange. But almost immediately, I realized something was different. The color was wrong. The fireflies I had seen before produced a greenish or yellow-green glow. Their lights flashed on and off, appearing briefly before vanishing again. These lights were pure white. They did not have the soft green color of insects. They were bright, clean points of white light, almost like tiny stars moving near the ground. They also did not blink in the same way. The lights remained visible as they moved. They drifted slowly from the tree line toward us. At first, we watched without speaking. I think each of us was trying to understand what we were seeing before admitting we were frightened. The lights did not rush. They floated calmly through the yard, spreading out as they approached the trampoline. There were enough of them that we could see they were moving independently. Some were higher than others. A few drifted close to the grass, while others moved at roughly the height of our heads. I searched for the dark shapes of insects around the light, but I could not see any. I also listened for buzzing. There was none. The lights came closer. That was when all of us became nervous. If they had remained near the trees, we could have continued telling ourselves they were insects or distant lights from another property. Instead, they traveled directly across the yard. They were heading toward the house. To reach it, they had to pass the trampoline. As the first lights came near us, something strange happened. They moved around the trampoline, not over it, not through the space where we were lying. They separated and passed along the sides. It looked deliberate. The trampoline was a large obstacle in the middle of the yard, and the lights behaved as though they could see it. Each one changed direction slightly before reaching us, moved around the edge, and then continued toward the house. None crossed above our bodies. None touched the trampoline. None passed beneath it. They simply went around us. That frightened me more than if they had flown directly overhead. Fireflies would not carefully avoid a trampoline in a coordinated way. Insects might change direction randomly, but these lights seemed aware of exactly where we were. They came close enough that I could see their brightness clearly. They did not cast large beams or illuminate the grass beneath them, but they were not faint either. Each one looked like a small point of concentrated white light. My friends and I began asking one another what they were. No one had an answer. We became convinced that something was wrong. The excitement of the sleepover disappeared. We were no longer joking or trying to scare each other. All of us were genuinely afraid. The lights continued leaving the trees. They drifted around the trampoline and toward the house, one after another. We made a decision together. No one was going to fall asleep. We said we would all remain awake until the lights disappeared. The idea was that as long as we stayed awake together, none of us would be left alone with whatever was moving through the yard. We also believed staying alert might protect us. At 12, the plan seemed reasonable. If something dangerous approached, we could scream, run inside, or wake my parents. We repeated the promise more than once. No one was going to sleep. Not after seeing those lights. We were too frightened to close our eyes anyway. I remember staring toward the trees, waiting for more of them to appear. I remember watching the lights drift around us. Then, there is nothing. The next thing I remember is opening my eyes in bright morning sunlight. The change was immediate. One moment it had been the middle of the night, and all of us had been terrified and promising to stay awake. The next moment, the sky was blue, the sun was up, and the backyard looked completely normal. All of us woke at nearly the same time. That was strange by itself. Normally, during sleepovers, one person wakes before the others. Someone moves, talks, or shakes the trampoline, and slowly wakes everyone else. That morning, it felt as though we all became conscious together. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then, we started asking what had happened. None of us remembered falling asleep. There was no memory of becoming tired, closing our eyes, or deciding that the lights were gone. The night seemed to stop in the middle of our fear. We had been wide awake. We had made a serious agreement not to sleep. We had believed something might hurt us if one person was left awake alone. Yet somehow, all of us had fallen asleep at almost the same time. We had slept outside until morning without waking again. The white lights were gone. There were no marks on the trampoline, no damaged plants, and no evidence that anything unusual had crossed the yard. In daylight, the tree line looked shallow and harmless again. We told my mother what had happened. We explained the lights, the way they came out of the trees, and how they moved around the trampoline. We also told her that all of us had suddenly woken in the morning without remembering when we fell asleep. She did not believe us. From her perspective, the explanation was probably obvious. We had stayed awake late, seen some fireflies, frightened one another, and eventually fallen asleep. Children often insist they were not tired before sleep takes them. The fact that all of us remembered the same thing did not convince her. Maybe she believed we had influenced one another's memories. Perhaps one person suggested the lights that avoided the trampoline, and the others agreed after waking. I tried to accept the firefly explanation. It was summer. We were outside near trees. There were small lights moving in the yard. That should have been enough, but the color remained wrong in my memory. They had been perfectly white. Their movement had been too calm and controlled. Most of all, I could not understand why they specifically went around us. For a while, my friends and I talked about the experience. Then, as children often do, we moved on. Nothing similar happened during the next few years. The trampoline remained in the yard for some time before it was eventually removed. The tree line stayed where it had always been. I sometimes looked toward it at night, hoping and fearing that the lights might return. They never did. By the time I was 16, my family's situation had changed. We were having financial problems, so my mother, my two sisters, and I moved into a very small mother-in-law guest house located in the backyard. The main house cost more to heat, cool, and maintain. Living in the smaller building helped reduce some of the bills. The guest house had only 2 bedrooms, so the space felt crowded. There was almost nowhere to have privacy. If one person spoke on the phone, everyone else could hear at least part of the conversation. If I wanted time away from my family, I usually had to go outside. This was during the time when mobile phone plans offered free minutes late at night. Anyone old enough to remember those plans will understand why people waited until evening to make long calls. One summer night, it became late enough that my minutes were free. So I called one of my friends. The weather was warm and pleasant. I wanted to speak without my mother and sisters listening, so I went into the backyard. By then, the trampoline was gone. There was a bench near the place where it had once stood, and I sat there with my phone. I was close to the same spot where the sleepover had happened 4 years earlier. At first, I did not think about that night. My friend and I were talking about normal high school problems. We discussed people we knew, things happening at school, and whatever drama seemed important at 16. The backyard was dark, but I was used to it. The guest house was nearby, and I could see the light from its windows. The tree line still separated the properties at the back of the yard. During the conversation, I looked away from the trees for a moment. When I looked back, the white lights were there. I recognized them immediately. There was no period of confusion this time. I did not need to wonder whether they were fireflies. I knew I was seeing the same lights from the sleepover. They were pure white. They hovered near the tree line, drifting between the trunks and the edge of the yard. My body reacted before I could think. I felt the same fear I had felt at 12, but I was older now and understood my own experiences differently. As I grew into my teenage years, I had begun to believe I was sensitive to spirits. I do not know how else to describe it. Sometimes I felt emotions or presences that did not seem to belong to anyone physically near me. Certain places made me feel grief, anger, fear, or calm without an obvious cause. I had become more aware of those feelings as I got older. Looking at the white lights, I felt something from them. It was not exactly a spoken message. I did not hear voices in my ears. The information came more like an emotion or understanding placed directly into my mind. The lights felt like spirits. More specifically, they felt like the remains of people who had been dead for a very long time. I had the strange impression that they had existed without bodies for so many years that their forms had broken apart. Instead of appearing as full human shapes, each spirit had become an individual point of light. I cannot explain why I understood them that way. No one had taught me that spirits could separate into lights. The idea simply came with the feeling. I sensed age from them. Not the age of one elderly person, but the weight of something that had existed for generations. At the same time, they did not feel violent. They felt lonely. Then another message came through the emotion. They were sorry. They understood they had frightened my friends and me when we were children. They had not meant to harm us. They had approached because they realized I could sense them. They wanted to be near someone who noticed they were there. Again, none of this came as clear sentences. It was more like receiving the meaning without hearing the words. Part of me remained frightened. Even if they did not intend to hurt me, I was sitting alone outside at night while unexplained lights gathered near the trees. I told my friend what I was seeing. I reminded her about the sleepover and described the lights in the yard. I explained that they had returned and that I felt as though they were spirits. My friend listened while I spoke. At least I believed she was listening. Then I said, "Oh God, they're starting to come out of the trees." At that exact moment, my phone died. I did not know it. There was no obvious sound that reached me, or I was too focused on the lights to notice. I continued talking. I thought my friend was still on the call. The lights began drifting forward. They moved from the trees into the yard, just as they had 4 years earlier. I stood from the bench and started walking toward the guest house. Unfortunately, moving toward the house also meant moving closer to the lights. The guest house stood between me and safety, and the lights were spreading through the yard in that direction. I kept talking into the dead phone, describing what was happening. My voice probably helped me stay calm. Believing my friend was still listening made me feel less alone. The lights continued moving. They did not rush me or surround my body. They floated slowly, following the same controlled pattern I remembered. I felt their attention. They knew I could see them. I do not remember whether they moved around me the way they had gone around the trampoline. I was too focused on reaching the house. I crossed the yard and entered the utility room attached to the guest house. Then I moved into the main living area. The moment I was inside, I went directly to the large window facing the trees. I wanted to see whether the lights had followed me. The yard was empty. Every light was gone. They had disappeared in the short time it took me to enter the house. My family was inside, but none of them had noticed anything. No one had looked outside and seen the yard filled with white lights. I checked my phone and realized the call had ended. The battery had died at the exact moment I announced that the lights were coming out of the trees. From my friend's perspective, she heard me say that something was approaching, and then the connection suddenly cut off. When I was finally able to speak to her again, she told me how frightening that had been. I had kept talking after the phone died, never knowing she could no longer hear me. That detail still bothers me. It is probably a coincidence. The battery may have already been low, and the timing only made it feel significant. But it happened at the exact moment the lights began moving into the yard. Sometimes I wonder whether they affected the phone. If they were spirits or some kind of energy, perhaps their presence interfered with it. I have no way to prove that. No one else in my family saw the lights that night. The friend on the phone never saw them either. She only heard my reaction before the call ended. That means the second experience had no visual witness. The first one did. My friends at the sleepover all saw the white lights. They saw them come out of the trees and move around the trampoline. They also experienced the same sudden loss of memory before waking together in the morning. That shared experience is why I do not believe I imagined everything. Could they have been fireflies? Possibly. Some species may produce lighter colors than the ones I knew as a child. Distance and darkness can also change the way colors appear. Maybe we were exhausted and fell asleep without noticing. Children often believe they are fully awake right before sleep. Perhaps we all woke together because one person moved and disturbed the trampoline. Those are reasonable explanations. But they do not explain the emotional message I felt 4 years later. Of course, that could have come from my own mind. I already remembered the lights as mysterious, so seeing them again may have caused me to create a story that made them feel less frightening. Telling myself they were lonely spirits who did not want to hurt me may have been a way to control my fear. I understand that possibility. Still, the feeling did not seem invented. It arrived all at once, along with a strong sense of recognition. They had come back because I was there. They remembered me. They were apologizing. That was the message I received. I never saw them again after that night. The tree line remained, but the lights did not return. I sometimes wonder whether they finally received what they wanted. Maybe they only wanted someone to acknowledge them. When I was 12, my friends and I treated them as a threat. We promised to stay awake because we believed they might hurt us. At 16, I looked at them and understood them differently. I listened. I recognized them. Perhaps that was enough. The strangest part of the first encounter will always be the missing moment between terror and morning. We were not becoming calm. We were not tired enough to willingly sleep. We were afraid and determined to protect one another. Then, all of us lost awareness. There was no transition, no memory of the lights leaving, no memory of anyone saying it was safe to sleep. Just darkness, fear, and then bright morning. Sometimes I wonder whether more happened during those missing hours. Maybe nothing did. Maybe our bodies simply became exhausted, and sleep took us at nearly the same moment. But the complete lack of memory feels unnatural. It is almost as though the night was cut into two pieces and everything between them was removed. I have also wondered why the lights avoided the trampoline. If they were insects, the movement could have been caused by heat, air currents, or the shape of the trampoline. If they were spirits, perhaps they were being careful not to touch us. Maybe they sensed our fear and kept their distance. The second time, I felt no desire from them to harm me. Only sadness, age, and loneliness. Even now, I cannot say exactly what they were. They may have been unusual insects. They may have been some natural electrical or atmospheric effect. They may have been spirits. Whatever they were, they appeared twice in the same backyard, 4 years apart. The first time, I was with friends who also saw them. The second time, I was older and alone, and they seemed to communicate through emotion. Both times, they came from the trees. Both times, they moved toward the house. And both times, they disappeared without leaving evidence behind. My mother never believed the story. None of my family saw them from the guest house. All I have are the memories, the reactions of the friends who were with me as a child, and the moment my phone died while I described the lights moving toward me. I still think about them sometimes. I picture those pure white points drifting from between the dark trunks. I remember how they divided and moved around the trampoline without touching us. I remember the promise that none of us would sleep. Then I remember all of us opening our eyes together beneath a bright morning sky. 4 years later, I sat near the same spot and watched them return. This time, I did not feel that they were hunting me. I felt that they had been waiting. They were sorry they had frightened me before. They only wanted to be close to someone who could still sense what they had once been. I do not know whether that understanding came from them or from me. But as they floated out of the trees and my phone silently died in my hand, I believed them. I was home alone one morning when something happened that I still cannot properly explain. It was fairly early, but everyone else had already left for work. The house was completely empty. and I knew I had plenty of time before anyone came back. There was nothing unusual about the morning. I was not feeling sick, stressed, or especially tired. I was simply getting ready and decided to take a shower. I had been alone in the house many times before. It never normally bothered me. I knew the sounds the building made, and I was used to hearing pipes, floorboards, cars outside, and neighbors moving around nearby. Being alone during the day did not feel anything like being alone late at night. The sun was up, people were awake, and the world outside was active. There was no reason to feel unsafe. I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and started the shower. I liked using hot water, so the room quickly began filling with steam. The mirror above the sink slowly fogged, and water collected on the walls and glass. I had music playing while I showered. I do not remember what song or playlist I was listening to. It was probably something ordinary that I had heard many times before. The music helped cover the sound of the water and made the quiet house feel less empty. For the first few minutes, everything was completely normal. Then, I suddenly felt as though I was no longer alone. The feeling did not begin with a sound. I did not hear the front door open, footsteps in the hallway, or someone calling my name. Nothing moved inside the bathroom. It was only a feeling. At first, it was faint, like the sense you get when someone enters a room behind you before you actually see them. My body noticed it before my mind did. I stopped moving and listened. The shower continued running, and the music kept playing, but I suddenly found both sounds distracting. If someone had entered the house, I might not hear them over the noise. I reached out and stopped the music. The bathroom became much quieter, although the water was still hitting the floor of the shower. I stood there and listened carefully. I expected to hear the front door closing or footsteps somewhere inside the house. There was nothing. I waited. The water continued flowing around me. The pipes gave their usual low sound. Outside the bathroom, the house seemed completely still. I wondered whether one of my family members had returned because they had forgotten something. That happened sometimes. Someone might come back for keys, a phone, paperwork, or something else they had left behind. If that were the case, I expected them to call out. No one did. I listened for close to 5 minutes. That sounds like a long time, but I wanted to be certain. I stayed still beneath the water, focusing on every small noise. Nothing suggested that a person had entered the house. There were no doors opening, no cabinets moving, no voices, no footsteps crossing the floor. Eventually, I convinced myself that the feeling had been caused by being alone. Perhaps the music and the shower had prevented me from hearing something outside, and my mind had become nervous because I could not properly check the house. I told myself to calm down and finish washing. I turned my attention back to the shower. For a short time, the strange feeling became weaker. Then, without warning, it returned much more strongly. It was not 10% worse. It felt 10 times worse. My entire body reacted. My stomach began hurting, not like normal sickness, but like a tight, heavy knot had formed inside it. My heart started racing. Within seconds, it was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my chest, neck, and ears. My hands began shaking. I had not seen anything. I still had not heard anything. But every part of me suddenly believed that something was nearby. The feeling was not simply that someone had entered the house. It felt as though something was standing inside the bathroom with me. I turned slightly, checking the corners of the shower and the space behind the glass. There was nothing there. The door was still closed. The shower curtain or door had not moved. The fear continued growing. I tried to breathe slowly, but my body would not calm down. The room felt different. The warm steam, which had been comfortable only a few minutes earlier, now felt heavy and difficult to breathe through. The bathroom seemed smaller. I became aware of the mirror directly in front of the shower. Because of the layout of the room, when I opened the shower door, the mirror above the sink was almost directly in front of me. For some reason, I suddenly felt that I needed to look at it. At the same time, I did not want to. I had always disliked mirrors when I was younger. As a child, they made me uncomfortable, especially at night. I did not like looking into them in dark rooms or catching my reflection unexpectedly. That fear had mostly disappeared as I grew older. By the time this happened, I could use mirrors normally without thinking about them. But standing inside that bathroom, the old fear came back immediately. I slowly opened the shower door. Warm steam moved into the rest of the bathroom. I looked toward the mirror. It was partly covered in fog. The glass was not completely white. I could still see my outline and face through the mist, but the details were soft and unclear. My reflection was there. It followed my position. Nothing about it was obviously wrong. But the moment I looked into the mirror, I felt that I was not looking at myself. I do not know how to explain that feeling properly. I could see my own face. I recognized my hair, my eyes, my shoulders, and the shape of my body. The reflection looked like me. Still, something about it felt separate. It was as though someone else was looking back through my face. I knew that the image should have been my reflection, but my mind rejected it. The eyes did not feel like my eyes. The expression did not feel like my expression. It looked like my body was standing in the mirror while something else was inside it. I stared. The reflection stared back. There was no clear movement that did not match mine. It did not smile by itself or turn its head in another direction. If anything like that had happened, the experience would have been easier to describe. Instead, everything looked normal while feeling completely wrong. That was what frightened me most. I waited for the image to change. It did not. I considered wiping the steam from the glass so I could see more clearly, but I could not make myself move closer. My heart was pounding harder. My legs were shaking. I felt locked in place. The water continued running behind me, filling the bathroom with sound, but it seemed far away. I became completely focused on the mirror. I could not look away. Part of me believed that if I stopped watching, the reflection might move on its own. Another part believed that something was standing behind me and might appear in the glass at any second. I searched the reflection for a second figure. There was nothing visible. I could see the foggy bathroom behind me. The shower was empty apart from the running water. No one was standing near the door. Still, I felt watched. The feeling seemed to come from inside the mirror rather than from somewhere behind me. It was as though the glass were not reflecting the room. It felt like an opening. I know that sounds impossible. A mirror is only glass with a reflective backing. It cannot contain anything. It cannot watch someone or create a separate version of them. I understood that even while it was happening. But logic did not change what my body was telling me. Every instinct said that the thing in the mirror was not me. I remained there for what felt like a long time. It may have been only a minute or two, but I cannot be certain. Fear made time difficult to judge. I did not blink much. I watched the reflection's eyes, looking for any small difference. The face seemed empty, not expressionless exactly, but disconnected. It looked like someone copying me without understanding why. I started feeling as though the reflection was waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for me to move first. Maybe it wanted me to step closer. The thought made the pain in my stomach worse. I wanted to call for help, but I knew no one was home. Even if I shouted, there would be no one nearby to answer. That made the house feel much more isolated than it really was. I was standing only a few rooms away from the outside world, but it felt as though the bathroom had become separated from everything. The mirror, the steam, and the running shower were all that existed. Then, the dazed feeling suddenly broke. I do not know what caused it. Maybe I blinked. Maybe my fear became so intense that my body finally chose to run. One moment I was staring at the mirror, unable to move. The next, I pulled myself away. I did not turn off the shower. I did not grab a towel. I ran out of the bathroom completely naked. I moved through the house toward my bedroom as quickly as I could. There were other mirrors along the way, or at least reflective surfaces I normally would not have noticed. I refused to look at any of them. I kept my eyes on the floor, the walls, and the path ahead. I felt as though something was chasing me. I did not hear footsteps. There was no sound of a person running behind me, but the feeling was powerful. I believed that if I slowed down or looked into another mirror, I would see something following me. The distance between the bathroom and my room was not very far, but it felt much longer. I expected a hand to grab my shoulder. I expected to see the strange version of my face reflected in a window or picture frame. Nothing touched me. I reached my bedroom, ran inside, and slammed the door. I locked it or held it closed. I cannot remember exactly which. My heart was still racing. I was breathing so quickly that I felt lightheaded. The first thing I did was cover the mirrors in my room. I did not want to see my reflection again. I used whatever was nearby, probably clothing, blankets, or towels, and placed them over the glass. Even after the mirrors were hidden, I did not feel safe. I kept looking toward the door. I listened for movement in the hallway. The house remained silent. That silence made the fear worse because I still felt something was there. I grabbed my phone and called my sister. By then, I was close to crying. I tried to explain what had happened, but the story did not come out clearly. I told her I was alone, that something felt wrong, and that I needed her to come to the house. I probably sounded panicked enough that she understood I was not joking. She agreed to come. Waiting for her was difficult. I remained in the bedroom with the door closed and the mirrors covered. I did not go back to the bathroom to stop the water. I did not put on clothes immediately, although I eventually found something to cover myself. I could still hear the shower running in the distance. The sound traveled through the empty house. Every few seconds, I thought I heard something else beneath it. A floorboard. A door moving. A footstep. Whenever I listened carefully, there was nothing. I wondered whether the reflection was still standing in the bathroom, even though I had left. That thought terrified me. A normal reflection disappears when the person moves away. But I could not stop imagining my image remaining in the mirror, waiting for me to return. I pictured it turning its head after I ran. I pictured it stepping away from the glass. I knew those thoughts were irrational, but fear does not care whether an idea makes sense. I considered leaving the house completely. That would have required walking past the mirrors and moving closer to the bathroom. I could not do it. The bedroom felt like the only safe place. Eventually, I heard my sister arrive. Even then, I did not immediately open the door. I listened while she entered the house and called my name. She knew I was frightened, so she checked the rooms before asking me to come out. She walked through the house, looking for anyone who might have entered. She checked downstairs, the hallway, the bathroom, and any place where someone could hide. I remained in my bedroom until she called out that everything was clear. Hearing another person's voice inside the house changed the atmosphere immediately. The heavy feeling began to disappear. I opened the bedroom door and carefully stepped into the hallway. My sister was there. The house looked normal again. I went downstairs, and the fear continued fading. The feeling that something was watching me was gone. It did not slowly weaken over several hours. It seemed to leave as soon as I was no longer alone. That was one of the details that stayed with me. While I was by myself, the house had felt occupied by something hostile. When my sister arrived, whatever I had sensed seemed to disappear. We found no sign that anyone had entered. The doors were secure. The windows had not been opened. Nothing was missing. There was no stranger hiding in the bathroom or elsewhere in the house. My sister turned off the shower and checked the mirror. It was only an ordinary fogged piece of glass. Nothing appeared wrong with it. I tried to explain the feeling to her. I told her I had looked at my reflection, but did not feel like I was looking at myself. That is not an easy thing to describe. A person either sees their reflection or they do not. There is no obvious language for recognizing your own face while also feeling certain that it belongs to something else. I said it felt demonic. I did not mean that I had seen a horned creature or a clear monster inside the mirror. There was no visible demon. It was the feeling of something unnatural and hateful watching me through my own reflection. It felt as though it had been waiting for me to become aware of it. Once I did, I could no longer pretend I was alone. My sister stayed for a while, and I eventually calmed down. I do not remember whether I used the bathroom again that day. I know I avoided mirrors for some time afterward. Whenever I passed one, I looked away or checked my reflection quickly, without staring. The childhood fear I thought I had outgrown returned. For years when I was younger, I had disliked seeing mirrors in dark rooms. Sometimes I covered them at night or avoided looking into them when the lights were off. I eventually stopped being afraid because nothing had ever happened. Then, in one morning, the fear came back stronger than before. I have tried to find normal explanations for the experience. The most obvious is a panic attack. The sudden racing heart, stomach pain, shaking, and overwhelming fear all fit. A panic attack can happen without an obvious cause. It can make a person feel detached from themselves or the world around them. That feeling of looking at my reflection without recognizing it emotionally could have been a form of depersonalization or derealization. Perhaps the steam, heat, and being alone made me lightheaded. Hot showers can affect blood pressure and breathing. The bathroom was humid, and I had been standing under hot water for a while. Maybe my body reacted physically, and my mind interpreted the symptoms as a threatening presence. That explanation is possible. It may be the correct one. The fogged mirror could also have distorted my face. When details are blurred, familiar features can look slightly wrong. My eyes, mouth, and expression may have appeared different enough to trigger fear. The human brain is extremely sensitive to faces. Even a small change can make a familiar face seem unnatural. Maybe I was staring at a distorted version of myself and became trapped in a cycle of panic. The more frightened I became, the stranger the reflection seemed. The stranger it seemed, the more frightened I became. That would explain much of what happened, but it does not completely explain the first feeling. Before I looked into the mirror, before my heart began racing, I already felt that someone was inside the house. I stopped the music and listened for 5 minutes, because the feeling was strong enough to make me believe someone had returned. Nothing happened during that time. Then the fear suddenly became much worse. It felt as though something had moved closer. Maybe that was simply anxiety building. The quiet house, the running water, and my inability to hear clearly may have caused my mind to imagine danger. Still, the timing felt deliberate. First, I sensed that I was not alone. Then, the feeling increased. Then the mirror no longer felt like a reflection. Finally, the entire experience ended when my sister arrived. I have not had another event like it. That is the only experience in my life that I would seriously describe as possibly paranormal. I have never seen a ghost. I have not heard voices in empty rooms. Objects do not move around me, and I do not regularly sense spirits. That morning stands alone. Part of me is glad it never happened again. Another part wishes I understood what caused it. A medical or psychological explanation would be comforting because it would mean nothing was actually inside the house. My body may simply have experienced an intense fear response. But when I remember the mirror, that explanation does not feel complete. I remember seeing my face. I remember knowing it was my face. And I remember feeling with absolute certainty that I was not the one looking back. The most frightening possibility is not that something stood behind me. It is that something looked through me. Maybe the steam distorted the reflection. Maybe panic changed my sense of reality. Maybe an old fear of mirrors returned at the worst possible moment. Those explanations make sense, and I try to accept them. But I will never forget the feeling of being trapped in front of that glass. I will never forget running naked through the house while refusing to look at another mirror. And I will never forget how the presence disappeared the moment my sister arrived. Whatever happened that morning, it seemed to want me alone. Once I was not alone anymore, it was gone.
The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.